We're going to be talking about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is known as the DSM. The DSM is, in fact, the manual that people in the helping professions, psychiatry, counseling, psychology, use to diagnose people's mental illness. The history of it is long. I don't have a DSM-1, but I do have a DSM-2. DSM-2 was in 1972 and was 119 pages, and that includes a fair number of charts.
A pamphlet.
A pamphlet. Then between two, there was a 3. I don't have one of those, but visually I think it's important to look at the difference between a 2 and a 4, which came out in the late 90s, where the number of diagnoses, in fact, exploded. Now, the length has not only to do with the number of diagnoses, but also an attempt to then start specifying exactly what made for a particular diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
The original intent, as I understand it, in the 2 was to give psychiatrists a way of talking to each other.
Yes, right.
So if I diagnose someone with a major depression, and the person moves across country with a diagnosis of major depression, the psychiatrist would know what
Yes.
they're talking about.
Right.
In that sense, it's a useful shortcut.
Right.
It's a very useful shortcut. But as we've become more sophisticated in identifying mental distress, it became more and more complicated and complex, and the book reflects it. Now, recently, in 2013, here's the DSM-5. Now, actually, it looks smaller than the 3. But it's a trick. The font size is much smaller than the font size for the 4. And if this had the same font size, I probably couldn't lift
Right.
it. We're going to be talking in the series that follows about both the positives and the negatives about the DSM, as it's become quite controversial. And we'll also be working through a number of the most common clinical diagnoses. On PsychCentral.com, people often look up a diagnosis or take one of our quizzes to determine a diagnosis. It's more complicated than that, and what we would like to do is clarify, at least to some extent, what has happened over the years and where we are now in terms of what these various diagnoses mean and what it means in terms of treatment recommendations. So, is there anything you wanted to add to that, Dan?
Just, it's in some ways it's kind of unfortunate because there's the American Psychiatric Association has to put this out so that we do have a shorthand, and it's no longer just a psychiatrist to psychiatrist, because now there are social workers, LPC, other professionals doing it. So we need some common language. At the same time, this is a compendium of everything that's wrong with people.
Right.
So in the training of a therapist, part of it is to look at what's wrong, that kind of thing. So we will spend a little bit of time to talk about maybe the flip side of this, which is how can you look at a person's strengths?
Right.
How can you look at what's strong rather than just what's wrong?